So welcome to another episode of SJS Recommends. I'm SJS and I'm here with my co-host Altaz from Cine Art Therapy. So how are you today, Altaz?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm looking forward to our discussion today after the first one we had.
Yeah, we'll see how this one goes, as one of these films is quite a very difficult film and I'm very excited to hear what you think of both of these films. So we are going to start with La Chinoise, then we are going to talk about Pauline at the beach, then I'm going to give you the recommendations for episode 3, and then after that we are going to briefly talk about some classical music with Debussy and Ravel that are part of a same string quartet recording by the Alban Berg Quartet. That recording is from the 80s, but anyway, so now we are going to talk about this film. It's Jean-Luc Godard's La Chinoise. It's from his famous 1960s period. This is from 1967, which was around the time he kind of started getting crazier and crazier, as you can see from this film. So, as I said it last time, I'll first ask you just general thoughts that whether you enjoyed this or not, because I know this is a film that people either hate or love usually, and I fall into the camp of loving it, but I know many people absolutely despise films like this, which is fine, of course.
Yes, I enjoyed the film.
Yeah.
I did. Yeah. It's I mean, we'll get more into it, but yeah, I did. Overall, I enjoyed the film. I think it's very interesting, and generally, I just look at it. Would I watch this again, or would I be interested? How interested would I feel to if I had to like watch it again? And I'm very curious to explore it again and multiple times because I think it's like you said, it's very complex, and when you're watching it, the initial is what am I watching exactly, and what exactly is going on. But of course, we'll discuss that more in the film. But I enjoyed it. Yes.
Yeah, and of course, this is a film that is complex both in like terms of the form, the cinematic form, but also thematically, and there are many different interpretations of this film. And again, many people see it just as a dull, very didactic political film, but
Yeah.
I also think it's like a quite a way funny film because these people are shown to be quite ignorant and hysterical, and their musings, at least to me, are quite funny at times, even though the forum and some of the constant name dropping of intellectuals and stuff can be very exhausting, especially if you don't know this type of like political theory or philosophy or literature. It can be, of course, very alienating if you don't know any of the people that they mention. And obviously, I like haven't read everybody they mention or anything like that, but I can know the people and I know something about the people that they mention. So I think that makes it a bit easier to watch a film like that, because I often say when I talk about Godard and when I talk about the fact how people often dislike Godard, I say that it's easier to approach Godard when you are like a art lover instead of just a cinephile, because there are constant references to literature, philosophy, politics, and even painting and other art forms, and even plays. Like they mention Brecht, I think, somewhere in the film, for example. So it's very important to have some idea of other art forms to approach Godard. And if you only watch films and don't care about other art forms, it can be very alienating then. And I'm not saying this as like a look at me, I'm so intellectual or anything like that, but I'm just saying that I think it's very important to have that kind of background to appreciate Godard.
Absolutely. I mean, yes, I agree with that. Uh, when I was watching the film, my initial just watching as the film starts, my initial um, feeling was that this is somewhere between a film and um, and performance art captured on film because of how it's deconstructed, where the narrative is almost seems secondary. So when I actually watched the film, I wasn't paying as much attention to the narrative. I was so captured by just what is being presented, right? With just the way it's being presented, what's being presented, what's happening. It's quite an intense experience. And you're right. There needs to be. I mean, someone doesn't need to know necessarily all those references, because I yes, I know those names or most of those names, but I don't know what's behind those names because I don't know those theories in detail or anything like that, or those movements in detail, so I wouldn't know exactly what they stand for. But there's a layer above. You can watch it as just as a curiosity about how this is different from a very narrative driven film, and it can be interesting just from studying on that standpoint.
Yeah, and I think I saw many reviews who kind of compared this to actually Wes Anderson. Like
Interesting.
it says like it's like if Wes Anderson was a Maoist, because there's some things in that kind of cinematic form, the cinematography, that are a bit like Wes Anderson, maybe the use of color, how we have these colorful backgrounds of red and blue and
True.
different
True.
colors, and then some kind of, and there's some of the shots are quite methodically framed, like they are very, very kind of steady and clear, and they kind of look like these perfect boxes almost. So in that way, it kind of feels like Wes Anderson, although the film itself, other than that, isn't like Wes Anderson at all. Although I guess as this film has that satirical vibe as well. Again, some Wes Anderson films, of course, have that quirky comedy as well, but in a very different way.
I think that's very interesting, actually. I never thought about Wes Anderson, and you're bringing up Wes Anderson, and I can see it actually why someone would say that. One is that Wes Anderson also is the way the how would you say, the way the narrative is takes place. It's done in with a combination of different elements. Um, so like that, like you said, like the framing, the monologue. So I'm thinking of that scene where he's sitting there at the desk and he's trying on different glasses, right? The Americans are like, puts on the glasses with the American flag, and then he's basically categorizing them and simplistically, and then China is like this and Russia is like this, and he's putting on the different glasses, and that is you can see that because you see that kind of shot. Even though I haven't watched it, but Asteroid City, there are scenes where I saw, at least in the trailer, where Tom Hanks' character is like sitting at a table and he's talking. So you can actually see that Wes Anderson, you would say, goes more into um, fantasy, but Godard isn't necessarily not going there. It's like fantastic or fantasy realism kind of thing. So I can actually see a lot of elements that are similar, and they're very deconstructed, and they're using different facts. Some feel like it's a documentary. Some parts it's like a monologue. So it's very like you said, like a stage play. And you mentioned Brecht. Uh, and so you can see that, and then some of it is very much like Marina Abramovich, like very like performance art, uh, and when you're taking quick shots and you're showing uh, different things to create an understanding of the world um, these characters inhabit psychologically and their conflict. So yeah, I can see that. I can definitely see that.
Yeah, I haven't seen Asteroid City either, but yeah, definitely lots of similarities there. But again, like I said, they are completely different at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And Godard, of course, I don't think there is really any other director who does it quite like him or did it quite like him. Yeah, he really stands out in the French New Wave as something very unique and different from the other voices. Like if you compare this to Truffaut, for example, it's
Yes.
completely different. They're very different from Romet as well, very different from Rivette. Like they all have very distinctive voices, and that's why Nouvelle Vague is very interesting movement, as all the directors had their own voice basically, at least all the big names.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So Truffaut, definitely you could see how this is totally different than Truffaut, and it's very interesting that you're right to see that they're coexisting and making films and have these different voices and approaches. I think it's also interesting to see that how these filmmakers were also questioning each other's work as well, and they were curious about what the other person is doing. But I think it's Godard and Truffaut. There was a point where they basically broke away from one another and weren't fans of one another, which also made me think that the main character, I think it's played by the actor's last name is Leo. Uh, that character seemed to me a little Truffaut-esque. He kind of looked like a bit like Truffaut, and then I was wondering, I'm probably overrating it, but I'm like, at this point, does he already have problems with Truffaut, and he's taking a little shot at Truffaut as well, a little bourgeois individual, as maybe he was seeing Truffaut more mainstream. But anyways, that's more, you would know more than I would. I'm probably just reading something into it that's not really there.
Yeah, I mean that actor is obviously the main character of the 400 Blows and those Antoine
Oh,
Donnell.
really?
Yeah,
Oh, really?
yeah, Jean-Pierre Lude. Yeah,
Oh, so I haven't seen any of those films. So Truffaut, I've only seen the 4 film set that Kino Lorber put out, with The Wild Child, The Green Room, The Man Who Loves Women. Um, so I've seen that set, and I've only seen The Bride Wears Black. So I don't know enough Truffaut. So I haven't seen Truffaut's core stuff, like the 400 Blows, for example. That's something I'm trying to do soon.
oh. Yeah, 400 Blows. Yeah,
Okay, so that's very interesting because that is supposed to be at least semi-biographical, right? Uh,
yeah,
so then Truffaut casts him because he sees that the actor kind of looks like him, and then yeah, so then that's interesting that I saw that. I was like, this actor looks a little bit like Truffaut, not exactly. So I was like, given that there was tension between the two, is there a reason, a choice to cast an actor that looks like Truffaut? So might have been by accident, might have been subliminal, uh, or it might have been just he's just the right actor and the right look for that role. So
yeah. But I think they had their kind of official falling out in the like few years after this in the 70s when
okay,
Day for Night came out. I think it was them, but I believe Godard and Truffaut were like really good friends since they were like quite young in their late teens or something. So at least
okay,
I'm not,
okay,
not quite sure. But Jean-Pierre Lude is an actor who is kind of like a often plays these intellectual characters. He's in a film called The Mother and the Whore. He's this
okay.
kind of pseudo-intellectual. I really love that character there. And he's even in one Kaurismäki film actually called the I Hired a Contract Killer. He's the main character in that.
Oh, really? Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
so but that's not
That's
actually in the
interesting.
box set. But I think it's available on Blu-ray like otherwise, but it's not on the box set.
So obviously this film has Brecht references all over, and I'll be honest, I actually never heard of Brecht. Right? I first time I heard it was when we were doing our Snowberry discussion, and I said, "Oh, Kafkaesque," and you said Brechtian
Yeah,
and Brechtian, and so I was like, "This is strange that I'm not familiar with Brecht." When once you get into, well, Godard films, but generally in this kind of cinema, you hear about Brecht here and there. It's very influential. So uh, I was hoping to learn a little bit more about kind of like the Brecht elements of the film, if that's something you're like more familiar with.
Well, I have to say that I'm not, because I've never
Okay.
read Brecht and never seen his plays, but I just know that
Right.
it's like this term that people often use, that yeah, this is Brechtian, that is Brechtian. I mean, I've seen like the one of Volker Schlöndorff film starring Fassbinder Ball, which also
Uh-huh.
Tony mentioned in the comment to our first podcast. Like that's, I think, a Brecht play, but again, it's just a movie and based on a play, so it's a bit different. But I really don't know much about him. But I think I definitely should read him, because he's just a constant reference in art house film circles that people use this Brechtian term so much. So I feel like I definitely should know what it means more than I do now, because I remember how amazing the feeling was after I had read Kafka, and I could use the word Kafkaesque. It was such a beautiful kind of inner snob moment, and I'm kind
Right,
of
right.
looking to have that again with Brecht at some point, but we'll see.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Yeah, from what I could gather, and I'm not familiar, and it's making me very curious to actually at least read some Brecht plays, is I guess the element of Godard wants to make it very obvious that you are watching a film. Like this is something manufactured and and created. So and I think that's goes back to what you're saying about Wes Anderson, because I don't think Wes Anderson is also not hiding. He's clearly showing you that this is a highly curated experience. Like, these are not realistic colors. These are not. And I think in this, it's like Godard, and this is my first Godard film. So what I could see is that he is making you aware by the way the film um, is presented, plus the sound and everything, that this is very manufactured and can be manipulated. So I also feel like doing certain things that almost feel like they're disrupting the film, flashing over here, flashing over there, makes you aware that here's a camera, and then it can be controlled, and it can put it on this, and it can put it on that, and it can frame like this, and then you can consciously choose colors, you can constantly choose sound, you can music. There's a reason there's music, so it's like you have the Mao Mao song, and then you also have Vivaldi uh, at the different, and he's clearly telling you this is the first part, this is the second part, this is the third part.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that. I'm going to show you that I'm manipulating you. Um, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the film is at the same time both like manufactured, but it also has a foot in reality at the same time. Also, this was a very relevant theme back when this film came out. That was the time when we had these Maoist movements in Europe, and obviously there were those big demonstrations and riots and things in France back in the 60s, and there were also Maoist movements in other European countries, here in Finland too. And of course, this I think was partly also kind of like a self-reflection from Godard, as he at the time, I think he wasn't quite at this time yet a Maoist himself, but he became a Maoist, and he also during some parts of his career was a Marxist and stuff. So this was kind of like a self-reflection, his kind of process of self-reflecting his own ideas and what works in them and what doesn't work in them, and what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. And of course, there's the one critique on this particular type of Marxism that these groups have in the film is that, again, that they talk about workers' rights, but they aren't workers themselves, and they don't hang out with workers. They don't really understand the workers, as they don't interact with them, but it's just purely theoretical, and they are inside their own bourgeoisie, but what's the word, bubble, and they don't really exit the bubble, and they just stay in the bubble and don't really take actual part in with the workers and with actual revolution in a way. It's just all kind of theoretical, and it all forgets the practice, and that's of course can be a problem with political philosophy when it's all just these high ideas of theory, but there's no regard to what works in practice.
Yeah, and so when I was watching this film, uh, just to add to like what, just to kind of add to what you're saying, so I was also thinking about that in relation to what we see today in terms of certain strong like positions and movements. And I was curious to think, so what does SGS feel about this film's lens being applied on the movements of today?
Oh, yeah, well, I mean, this film is at the same time, I think, kind of still relevant, but also dated in a way. Because, of course, there are still Maoists, but it's a very fringe thing, way more fringe these days than it was back then. But, of course, you can just look at this film as a commentary on kind of more generally on political radicalism and the radicalism in youth. It doesn't just have to be about the particular Maoism and Marxist-Leninism, but it can be commentary on radicalism more widely, and then the film can be taken as always to be relevant, because of course there's always political radicalism in the world. Like, I mean, currently, obviously, it's lots of far-right radicalism in Europe, for example, but of course there is also still this Marxist-Leninism here and there, but it doesn't really have a strong footing anywhere in Europe. But there are Marxists out there, of course, and other types of communists as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I see what you're saying there. One thing that's you're pointed out earlier is that how humorous this film is, and which it is, and what I, connected to what we're discussing, I feel like it felt like, yes, he is revealing um, that this movement, especially in this case, is being pushed by individuals are not actually connected directly with the causes being championed, meaning they're not actually workers. And, true Marxism, with the limited experience I have with it and knowledge of it, is related to basically a revolution being led by workers themselves. But I also felt at the same time that there is an empathy there. It's like he's not exactly fully lampooning them. He's not fully denouncing them either, because he's kind of saying, yeah, there are the, well, at least it seemed to me that there's that little bit of, he's saying, okay, here are the contradictions. Here's even some of the hypocrisy. These are the reasons you might not want to listen to them. But it also made me think of that through history, when you look at like philosophers and writers and theorists and all that, generally they're not always coming from the experience that they're championing, including Godard himself. I understand that he himself was um, someone who was quite bourgeois, or seen as bourgeois. He's coming from a quite like good, not good, but kind of upper class, upper middle class background. So he himself is no working person, and what he's engaging in, when you think about it, political, talking about political things through film, it seems kind of like a quite an elite pursuit, because if you're a worker, you really don't have time to, and the resources, even though they made these on shoestring budgets, but still, you don't have the luxury to go around making films and articulate in these abstract ways and be like deconstructing how a film is made. There's something that is almost like a mirror of himself in there too that he's trying to work out, because he in some ways is talking about a cause or drawing attention to a cause and its flaws and all that, but at the same time what he's doing is remote. It's reserved to an elite. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I've read like criticism of this film from Marxists, for example, and some of them say that that Godard is kind of like, again, the characters in the film, that he's also, again, bourgeoisie who has these theoretical ideals, but he doesn't do the quote-unquote dirty work and go to the working class and stuff. But of course there have been like, I mean, this is a bit of a side note, but many intellectuals who have done that and went to the workers. I mean, there's this female philosopher called Simone Weil, and I know she spent lots of time with the workers, for example, and with these movements. So that's kind of the ideal that many of these critics of Godard would have wanted Godard to do as well, that he would have went to the workers, and also for, of course, these characters themselves, that they should have gone to the workers, but they didn't. And of course there's this scene in the film in the train when there's this guy kind of criticizing the kind of main character of the film, and one of the points that he brings is just this, that you aren't a worker yourself and you are just a student and yada yada yada. Yeah.
Yeah, and those are all interesting points. And I mean, I myself don't necessarily reject someone because, right, like I feel like this is not a reason to reject Godard's work, but I can also understand people who are very committed from their perspective, that there should be a pure movement. And again, like this gets back to this theme of what is a pure movement, right? Because I think that's the whole thing, that there's so many levels where he's saying the people in it see it as a pure movement, but how is it a pure movement? So why are you concerned with, for example, well, what makes someone concerned with uh, a situation for workers in China, for example? Or why would someone look at what's going on in China and then say, oh, well, it's the same thing that's happening in France? I think there's some dialogue around that too, where it's like, well, that's not really what's happening in France, unless I'm misremembering. So I think it's like there's this question, and I think like I enjoy this kind of work because it's questions. It's not. I feel like one reading is that he is definitely taking a position, and at the same time, I feel like it can look like someone's taking a position just by asking certain questions. And I don't know enough about him to know what he was trying to do, but what I experienced it is a very deconstructed piece of work. So, we're not focusing so much on narrative versus the world they're in. The narrative is, well, these guys are almost like bored teenagers or in their 20s who've been radicalized by ideas and who are hanging around in an apartment bored. But he also breaks that later on by creating serious consequences. So I think this kind of deconstruction and asking lots of questions can be helpful to anybody. It's a way to think versus something that's being presented as discourse. But I don't know. Do you experience it that way, or do you see it slightly differently?
Well, I think you talked about again the connection to France and China, for example. So I think there's a bit of this commentary on kind of like domestic policy versus this kind of big international picture. So of course they just look at China, but then they kind of fail to understand their own country, while if they really want a revolution and change things, they should be looking kind of within and not outside. So I think that's something that Godard was probably also thinking when he was making this. And then again, going back to the bourgeoisie thing, of course, early in the film, there's this kind of a funny scene when we see this like furniture in the room, and obviously it's like very expensive, like upper middle class furniture, and then we just have that as the background while we hear this kind of sound, the characters musing their garbage, and we just see that how hypocritical they are. It's just looking at the materialism, but we hear that, yeah, workers this, workers that. And then there is also this, I think, very important point about the leftist kind of infighting, because there's the one character that comes home and then he's beaten up, and they said that, what was it, the Marxist-Leninist group in Sorbonne or something like
Sorbonne,
that. Yeah.
Which is so elite, right? So the Sorbonne,
Yeah, so it's funny how, again, all of them are Marxist-Leninists, but they are still fighting against each other. And that's also, I think, very important point in general, because often in the world, we simplify things and we just say, there is the left, there is the right, even though there is many different types of left, there's many different types of right. Like this kind of showcases that even like a very small differences kind of separate people, and it's not as simple as just putting people into these kind of bigger picture camps of the left and right, but there is so much individuality in all of these groups.
Right. And so that, again, this is like very deconstructing, I guess you would say, postmodernist. And this China, I think it's also, as you're speaking, this is, I really enjoy the dialogue, because every time we talk about a film and I'm listening to you talk about certain elements, I'm rethinking and re-seeing things in the film. So it's like when I watched the film, I didn't see certain things, but now that you're talking about the themes and things you're pointing out, I'm like, oh, okay. So, for example, it's also important to see what Godard does in the film and how he does it. So we were talking about China and France, and then we see, oh, okay, the color scheme. You would see these red, white, and blue. This is the colors of the French flag, the colors in the American flag, and then you constantly see the Mao's red book, so a lot of reds, and then you see yellow every now and then, and yellow is also in the Chinese flag. So it's very interesting, because it's almost like he's breaking down and saying, what are the history and elements of each country? So France is already coming from a background where that red, white, and blue takes you back to the Enlightenment and the ideals of égalité, fraternité, liberté, égalité, fraternité. Right. This is the backdrop. You are not. So it's again another way of deconstructing. Like, look at the elements that kind of formed the modern France, or where we are today, the elements that slowly built up. What is actually happening in relation to those elements? Almost like, why are you importing elements externally? Why not those elements here? Because those are pretty solid foundations for a republic. And then I guess also comparing this republic versus the American Republic, which is also built on French Enlightenment principles. So I think it seems like there's like a lot there. Now that you're talking, I'm like, okay, even stylistically, this film is really dense.
Yeah, and I think there's also commentary in those colors and stuff that like, what is liberty, for example, and what are these concepts, that whether they actually happen more in this, or would they kind of be realized in this Maoist world, or are they already be realized in the world they live in, or in America, or in China, or whatever. So there's this kind of idea there maybe too, but of course there's also always this kind of big debate about this film, whether it's kind of, even though at least to me it's clearly, again, kind of makes fun of these people and but it's also sympathetic to them. But some people say that it's just like a complete endorsement of these ideas, which to me is pretty ridiculous. I don't think it's that, because it's just so clearly makes fun of it, even though it's sympathetic to it at the same time. So it kind of feels in a way like a very mature portrayal of these issues, as it doesn't just take a very black and white view on it.
Yeah, very mature. I agree with you. Very mature, very complex. I didn't see that it was a endorsement. I think that's also interesting what you just said about each of those elements, and then okay, what has that liberty? What does it look like today, or what's happened to it, or an action tied? So like when he's like Vietnam is constantly being brought up, because obviously that's like a proxy war that's based on this principle of communism versus not even democracy, but it's always communism versus democracy, but it's really capitalism versus communism. And so I see your point that alone is also begging the question, because Vietnam is a country where both the French and the Americans were involved. And so, civilizations or modern civilizations that are based on these principles now acting in this way, what does that what does that mean, and what is the correct answer for that? Is it just you're going to adopt Maoism as like the purest form of communism in their perspective, and that's going to solve all those issues? Um, Again, questions. And then on top of that, the showing that division where he says there are two kinds of communism. One kind of communism, essentially the West doesn't mind about, and then the kind of communism that the West does have a problem with, giving it a much more romantic feel to Maoism. Um, yeah, very interesting.
And of course, the core idea in Marxist-Leninism is the dictatorship of the proletariat, which makes these kind of views of these people quite hypocritical again, as they are middle class themselves. So they kind of want to get rid of their own power and give the power to the proletariat, because they aren't proletariat themselves. So in that way, I guess you see them even as, in a way, noble, as they are willing to like sacrifice their power. Although then again, they don't really any of them don't really understand what they are talking about, and we can see that in the film, that they are just talking about these things that they don't fully understand, and it's kind of like that they're trying to work out through these ideas by this dialogue in this film, but they never kind of get to the point when they actually really understand what they are talking about.
Yeah, again, like I can see now what you're saying in the elements of the film, and also how the film is made. So there's this, as we discussed earlier, some people might feel that this film is remote because there's this kind of montage approach to making the film, right? You clip one thing and clip one thing, and it's like, so in the beginning we see this frame, and it's this nice furniture, like you said, in this nice apartment, and clearly these are where these students are going to stay. And then it's like, it might clip over, and then it's like, I forget what the main girl's name is. Yvonne is the other one, but the main girl, I forget her name. And then she's sitting there trying to tune into that radio. It's like this military grade radio, trying to tune into a station from China that's broadcasting, Maoist ideas and all that, and basically connecting the revolution. And you see Yvonne, who's like in the background, she's like dusting the radio, and she's like one of them, but she's not one of them. So right away you see that it's not like they don't believe in class and elitism, but at the same time they are proponents of ideas that are supposedly supposed to break that. But in their whole psyche, I think, yeah, that's also interesting then. Yeah. It's like also in their psyche, how are they ever going to break these divisions that have basically been formed in them from birth because of where they were, what they were born into.
I don't know if you watched one of the interviews on the Blu-ray that has the French academic. I think it was this Denitsa Pancheva on La Chinoise. The author discusses the film and its politics.
Yes,
That
I
was
listened
quite,
to that.
yeah, that was quite interesting. And she, for example, talks about the kind of ridiculousness of their ideas. And I think she mentions one of the things that one of the characters says something about exams and how
Oh
they
yeah,
create
that was
things,
so funny.
sexual frustration or something like
Yeah,
that or whatever.
yeah, that was so funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna. Yeah, I think that's all hilarious, and also how people can. What would you say? Like people can take an idea, appropriate an idea, and then take it towards something they have a problem with that doesn't connect with what that idea is trying to break down. So if they had said, we don't want these exams because they basically are a way of oppressing a certain class, that would be more in line with what with with the philosophy itself. But instead, it's like, well, I want to remove this, but it's more like for your own personal discomfort. It has nothing to do with correcting. And maybe Godard there is also saying that people might be doing certain things, but in a much more self-interested way than you think. They might be proponents of this, and it may outwardly look like they're fighting for all this, but internally maybe they're just looking for their own benefit. And I think that can be also like a critique of also what happened with communism in Russia, because it's like everyone's well-meaning, and then really that movement then gets appropriated or led by people who are more self-interested. They're about power, they're about control, they are still about directing the best resources to themselves. So maybe perhaps he's trying to go there with that.
Yeah, but then again, they have done research on that. Apparently, they have better sex on communism than on capitalism. But that's like one.
Really?
Yeah, there was, I think, they compared East Germany and West Germany or something like that. Yeah. But anyway, so that in that way you could make that point to make some sense. I guess that exams create sexual frustration or that or something. Yeah.
I mean, that's an interesting fact, but then it also matters why that might be the case, right? Because if it's like, I don't know, people have less free time. I'm not saying that's the case, but I'm saying that's an interesting fact, but then it's like a fact or like an interesting statistic, but it's like needs explanation. Like why is that the case, right?
Yeah, and I think that was only like one study done quite a long time ago, but I just
I mean,
remember.
it could be as simple as, well, because communism, I don't know, denounces religion, that people have less shame surrounding sex, so they're more comfortable having it. It could, the explanation could be anything. Uh, or at least the way I'm seeing it, I'm like, that's an interesting fact, but it's like the conclusion is like, oh, this is a better system, that's why people are having more sex. But uh, usually sex is a way of releasing sexual frustration. So yeah, people are having less sex, but why? What does that necessarily mean? Society's worse because people are having less sex? I mean,
Yeah, like really struggling with, because I was just thinking about one of the things about the like one other aspect of their elitism, but like my mind is blanking out. Like, because there was one important thing that mentioned in the interview about their elitism, but like I was just thinking about it, but now kind of forgot it. Yeah.
it's okay. They'll
So
come back.
yeah, hopefully.
They'll surely come back. Yeah. There are definitely lots of elements to their elitism. I mean, even the way they dress, they're all very well dressed. Um, and kind of trendy and stylistic and wearing things that are vogue, like that are the style of the day. That they're not, which those are concerns that wouldn't be, like, if you think about it, a working class concern per se.
Like I mentioned already, the furniture also, but also the whole apartment, how big it is for students and how they kind of get access to it is also very
Yes.
elitist. You just ask a friend or something, and yeah, you can stay here.
Yeah. This is funny. It's not even related, but it's like made me think of, remember in Sopranos when AJ goes to his girlfriend's house
Yeah,
and she has a bigger house than him, and they're like these three teenagers and they're just hanging out in this huge house, with all these like classic records and everything like that. So it's like that, what you're saying, the access, yeah, like how they're planning this revolution, but they're clearly sitting there. And in Paris, it's not cheap to have those apartments. So a really nice salon, a really nice apartment, protected, free of intrusion by parents. The parents are not present; they've just left them to their own devices,
yeah.
and in that they're so frustrated and angry uh, by certain things that really aren't even of immediate concern to them. But at the same time, you could have the counter and say, well, generally, if you're so bogged down by the challenges of daily life, you really don't get a chance to think about systems. You don't really get to think about injustice. You don't even get to think about world affairs, because if you're just going day to day, you have very little time to really think about world affairs, think about history, think about politics, philosophy, even art. I mean, art is seen as this, as we've discussed in our snobbery thing too, as that's why I guess probably even someone like Godard, there is a division that, okay, this is entering snob territory because it's more like, well, you've got to have time for something like that. It's much more frivolous by being so complex and kind of useless, and it takes more time. So therefore, it belongs to someone who is more elite.
Yeah, now I actually remember the thing that I forgot.
Mhm.
So there was this line in the film. I'm kind of paraphrasing it, but it's something like that: minority isn't a minority if they are right, or something like that. That kind of, it's not a minority anymore when they have the correct opinion or something like that. So that's such a elitist thing to say. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
There's
that
lots of great
doesn't really
dialogue.
make any sense either. So yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. There's a lot of that, like dialogues that don't make any sense. And again, I think it was also in that interview where that's serving a purpose to help you understand the either the conflicting nature of their mind, but also their inability to fully grasp things in context and all these things.
But I'm glad that you really like this film. I think it was maybe something like a not the best like starting point with Godard. Kind of like Tony said in that comment that it might have been better to watch something a bit more quote unquote normal from him and not start with this. Although this isn't one of his most complex films, he kind of gets more nuts after the 60s, and it's like he's completely incomprehensible what he's doing often. But this is at least something that you can make sense of.
Hmm.
But I think, for example, this film Weekend, I think it came out even in the same year. It's like very political, also kind of similar.
Hmm.
So I think maybe we'll talk about this one day in the podcast. We'll see.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, and what you're saying, I mean, it's definitely wasn't easy, right?
yeah,
Because the film, when the way it starts, it just it's throwing so much at you that it's like, like you said, Wes Anderson, but it's in a much more entertaining fashion. But even some people don't like films like what's the Darjeeling Limited or something like that, where it's like it's not it's not kind of the narrative is not in a told in this kind of linear way. There's these really diversions, what feel like diversions, and it can not help you get in the flow. So it's a difficult film for sure. That you're sitting there and then there's things are just happening, and I think it was helpful that I knew a little bit about the history of that period, especially in relation to the Maoist movement, um, and knew a little bit about modern art and performance art and things like that, and what they were trying to do in terms of deconstructing themes and narratives and even motifs and stuff like that, and then really challenging what the medium itself is and what it really represents, which is another layer where this film, besides the political, it's like it's just about, well, what is this medium, because there's all these references to films, right? Like even that part where he said at the end where that Henri is like near the end where he's like, well, these guys just don't like Johnny Guitar. It's a good film and they'll just denounce it because it's American. So like clearly there's a whole other layer to this film which is all about his favorite topic of film criticism, right? Because I guess him and Truffaut, and they're like film critics becoming filmmakers. Um, so it's definitely a difficult film, and I just went with it, and it's really in my appreciation grew after then reflecting over the week or so, like what did I just see? What was actually going on? What were the some of the things, and then talking to you about it adds even more to it. But yes, overall, I enjoyed it because I do like that kind of stuff that also raises a lot of questions, even in terms of film and film reality, right? Because it's like I'm telling you a story or about reality, but it's film, so it's not reality. It's film reality. And what does it mean that it's film reality? And then how can you what can it inform you about reality? So it's very um, remote in that way, not easily accessible for sure. Like very difficult film. I mean, difficult film. I think there are more difficult films for sure, but this is not an easy film, but it's a rewarding film. I would say, and that's why I enjoyed it, and I would like to watch it again because all these things we talk about are so interesting.
Yeah, and I think in the interview that I mentioned, they mentioned that Godard said something like that. I don't make films, I animate them. Because he
Mm-hmm.
makes them like completely different than what the traditions of filmmaking are. And I'm glad that you mentioned Johnny Guitar as well. Of course, Godard was like a huge fan of Nicholas Ray. He was one of his Godard's favorite filmmakers, and Godard, of course, loved American cinema a lot. Even though, like in some of these films, when you watch them, you might think that maybe he didn't how critical he can be of the kind of American politics and these like any type of mainstream politics in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think yes, they had like respect for the craft, just like I guess also Truffaut being such a fan of Hitchcock and all that. And I think that's why this kind of film is important, because you get to see different voices. Like even in the commentary track on that, there was this mention that this film, it was Samuel Fuller and like Roger Corman and all these people went to see this film La Chinoise, and then they were asking Godard questions about the film. And I think that also connects to like what we discussed about snobbery, is that in those filmmakers, because Roger Corman was such a different kind of producer and filmmaker, and what his interests were or where, but yet they respected each other's films and actually were curious about them, like about the elements. And I think that that's what your kind of your channel and your mission is about, that I really appreciate. It's really about that this film has a place. Don't just think of it as it has of no value because it seems a bit difficult or a bit remote. It's actually celebrating the same thing that Johnny Guitar is celebrating, and so I really enjoyed that as well. There, it's like, but just because you revere something doesn't mean you can't critique something either, which I think is a very healthy mindset.
Yeah, but I think Nicholas Ray was in many ways kind of like a black sheep of that
Yeah, yeah,
that time of Hollywood, because his films, I think, well, they were darker than most films at that time, and they also were more layered and complex. And he, of course, talked about things like toxic masculinity and things like that that many directors weren't.
yeah. He's very aware. I mean, yeah, that's what I found. Every Nicholas Ray film I watch, I really enjoy, and I'm amazed by the perspective because I was like, oh, he's
Yeah.
his sensibilities, like his awareness for certain things. Um, that's why I want to also another the Toth. I haven't seen a lot of his films, but one my favorite Western right now is Day of the Outlaw, just because it's such a deconstructed Western in a way that I'm just amazed that it was already like people were that perceptive about these ideas of like masculinity and aggression and um, and all that and bringing those themes into something that's rooted on those elements. Very interesting.
And that's why also, again, I recommend it to you, because you asked me for Criterion Flash Sale recommendations. I, of course, recommended to you one Nicholas Ray film, Bigger Than Life,
Yeah,
which
I'm
I saw
looking
on
forward to
PFI
that.
South Bank. So we can maybe talk about that someday in the podcast. I think that's a great movie. It's like the 1950s version of The Shining, because it's
I'm
about a guy
definitely
who wants
looking
to
forward
kill
to
his
seeing
family.
that.
Yeah,
Mm.
I saw it in
No,
the
I'm very
cinema.
much looking forward to. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry,
Yeah, it was a
go ahead, please.
great time for me to see it in the PFI South Bank. Yeah, back in the day. Yeah.
Which was it? Was it? Did you see it in the large one hall or one of the smaller ones?
Yeah, that was, I think, in the second biggest one. Yeah, because there's the really big one, then there's the second biggest one, and then there's the studio, and then there's the kind of small one. And yeah, I've again saw lots of films in all of those rooms, but yeah.
I was when you said that in that video that it was like your second home. So when I was there with my wife when we went to see that new Hamaguchi film, Evil Does Not Exist, I was saying to her, I was like, I'm trying to imagine like SGS here, like like as a student and stuff. I was like, maybe he's with this backpack. He probably didn't hang out at the cocktail bar,
No.
but maybe he was in the bookstore in the library.
Yeah, and I was sitting there reading Kafka once, and
Mhm.
sometimes listening to brutal death metal on my headphones while I was waiting for films, because I was always really early there. As one of the rare virtues that I have is punctuality. So yeah.
No, especially the film. I'm the same. Even though here you get in the UK you get assigned seating, but I'm used to the North American model where you don't. So if you're not early, you won't get a good seat. And so I'm so obsessed with like being early. And then in that space, you want to be early because, I mean, just a nice digression on BFI. What a wonderful space that is. I mean, it's absolutely inspiring. It's beautiful. And it's also amazing that it's a charity, it's a not for profit. And then it makes you think that does the profit model actually support cinema? And it's just so inspiring to see because when we talk about this snobbery thing, when you go to BFI and you see how all these films, like many of them sell out, many of them are like at least 80-90% occupancy, all these films, it's just really amazing. And there's nothing like seeing it in the cinema and experiencing those things on the big screen.
And I, of course, met our mutual favorite director there, Terry Gilliam. So that was nice.
Was it for a showing of one of his films?
Yeah, Jabberwocky.
Okay, and so he was there and like he
he
did
gave
that
an
kind of.
introduction. Yeah, and he was
And then
looking at me in the eyes
you
because I was in the front, kind of. So I was really close to him, but I absolutely hated that movie. Like I had such an awful time with that movie. Like
I've never seen it. I've never seen it.
I considered leaving like midway through, which I never do. But I see through the whole film. But it was nice to see Killian. But the film itself was just absolute torture.
No, I've never seen that film actually. Gilliam, I've seen Fisher King, but so long ago, like 20 years ago. So I still need to see that again. And the only thing recently I've seen of his is Time Bandits. That's yeah. But that's interesting though. He's a pretty interesting guy though. Like when you listen to his Q&A and stuff.
Yeah, he's like Scorsese in the way that I rather listen to them talk than watch their films. Because they know their cinema, but their films aren't always my cup of tea.
Marty,
yeah,
Kundun, I liked it. Goodfellas is your favorite film. I know now.
Well, it used to be, but it really used to be as a teenager one of my favorites.
It's been a long time since I've seen that one too. But now that you're keeping me on track with like two movies at a time, so I really don't have much time. And then now that I have BFI tempting me every now and then, like this Sunday they're showing High and Low, but I'm already going to Late Spring at the Garden Cinema. So I almost considered running from Late Spring over to High and Low right after, and then seeing that right after. But it's like I don't know if I can make it in time with the buses.
Yeah, I always did these like pretty long walks from like Oxford Street to Waterloo and the BFI something.
Oh yeah, very nice.
Because again, I lived in like a place called Hendon in London, and then outside my house there was this 113 bus to Oxford Circus, and I always took that there, and it was like an hour-long bus ride, and then I stopped at Oxford Circus, and then I loved walking around there, and then I just went through Regent Street and Piccadilly Circus, Leicester Square, Trafalgar Square, and then to Waterloo.
Oh wow. Stopped in at the National Gallery, maybe.
Yeah, I often did that. Yeah.
That's so amazing, right? And did you go to the Tate often?
No, unfortunately not. Yeah, I kind of regret it actually afterwards that I didn't really go there. So, but I always went National Gallery. I visited probably 10 times at least.
Being a Godard fan, then the Tate Gallery should also be here.
Yeah, and they actually have one of my favorite paintings, but I didn't know the painting back then. I think it's the Lament of Icarus, which is really beautiful. Yeah, but
I can't picture it. I can't picture it right now. I'll need to look it up after. I can't picture it in my head which one that is. Who's that by?
Oh god, I'm blanking with the name. Well, I can
No,
actually
that's okay.
wait, I can screen share, but then we definitely have to go to the next film.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Herbert James Draper. I think I mentioned this in one of my painting videos, but
Okay.
But
I like digressions, by the way. So this was a nice digression.
Yeah,
it was nice to hear about your experiences.
We'll see how this actually looks in like YouTube. I don't know, but it's this painting.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I think I remember correctly that it was there in London, but I might be wrong.
Wow!
But yeah, it's really beautiful.
It is really beautiful.
But yeah, again, glad that you liked La Chinoise, and I wouldn't recommend that film to most people, but I know that you are so open-minded that I can recommend to you these crazier films as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, it was crazy, but I liked it, and it's definitely one I'm gonna watch again because I think it's so interesting. Yeah. And now that I watch Godard, then I feel less intimidated now to see his other films. as I see you've got that box set back, the guitar box set.
Yeah, out of that box set, there are a few there that we could talk about in the future. There's one that I've been meaning to rewatch that we could do in some episodes called Pierrot Le Fou, which is one of his very important films. So.
And I'm really interested in seeing Le Petit Soldat.
Yeah.
Have you seen that? Oh, you must have seen it, obviously.
Yeah, a few years ago. Only once. So
what did
yeah,
you
it's
think of
good.
that?
Yeah, it's good,
And of
but
course,
it's not one of my favorites. It's not one of my favorites, but it's good.
and of course, we need to always shout out Tony. I'm beating you to it. Thank you, Tony. I picked up a nice
This one,
pre-loved copy.
and this one is my favorite, along with La Chinoise, Vivre sa vie.
Okay, that one I'm definitely very interested in seeing as well.
And Tony has the same favorites as well. So.
Okay, very nice.
Yeah. Do you own this yet, by the way? Yeah.
No, I don't own that yet.
Yeah, but I think the Criterion is also available in the UK. And
Yes.
this, I think, is out of print. I just got this before it went out of print, but this BFI version actually, I think, has more special features than the Criterion.
Yeah, sometimes a BFI release is much better. Like they'll have a commentary track that's not on the Criterion and stuff like that. So it's like.
And I was actually really happy when you mentioned that they are releasing the Mikio Naruse film.
Yeah.
Because we actually didn't know that they were releasing that. So because that's one of my absolute favorites and one of the best of that era of Japanese cinema. So it's really good that it comes out in the UK too, because his films haven't been really available in the UK.
Yeah, and on Blu-ray.
Yeah.
So we'll send you one across from the UK care package.
Yeah, but anyway, let's go to the next film because so that we won't run out of time. But so next we are gonna talk about another French film, another very famous director, but a very different type of film than La Chinoise. But it's one of the comedies and proverbs. It's Pauline at the Beach by Eric Romer. One of my top 5 directors. Actually, when I rewatched this film, of course, last time I said that that this was like a near favorite film, but now after a rewatch, it became a favorite for me. And then now there are, I think, like 8 Romer films in my favorites list, and then there are also plenty of others that I like. So I had to move him up on my favorites list a bit, and now he's 5th on my favorite directors list. So that's pretty insane, and I kind of feel like he will go up even still. But nobody's gonna beat David Lynch ever. But yeah. Yeah. But so what did you think of this film again? Some small general thoughts about it before we get into the details.
So yeah, I mean, my experience always with Romer is the following: the film starts, and I'll feel like, this seems a bit frivolous, and then as I give it time, and it starts growing on me, and then by the end, I'm like, oh, that's a really good film. So I really enjoyed it. But currently, I would say my favorite Romer film is the other one included in this, Full Moon in Paris. But Pauline at the Beach is really good, and I really enjoyed it. And it reminded me also a little bit of La Collectionnaise, which I also really enjoyed. And so I really enjoyed it. So once again, it's a great film. Yeah, and I'm learning to appreciate Romer.
Yeah, I just enjoyed it so much because I, of course, have this taste for soap operas, and this is a pretty crazy, like, soap opera of mess of these kind of different relationships, and it gets pretty crazy in that way, especially in the second half of the film as the relationships develop a little bit. And again, not many of these characters are the type of characters that you don't really root for or relate to, as they are pretty kind of awful in many ways, although in that kind of normal people way, not awful in like Frank Putin, Blue Velvet, but more in that kind of everyday way.
Yes,
and it's fun. Yes. And the one, I think, theme on this film is how the adults are so childish, but the 2 teenagers are kind of more mature, and how they talk about love It sounds
Yeah.
like they really understand it, but then the adults are just like teenagers and they have this kind of love triangle or even quad triangle, as there's the a woman who
Hmm.
um, sells the candy and stuff. Yeah.
That is like a very keen observation with how the youth, because you see the same theme in The Aviator's Wife as well, which I loved, that the younger person seems to be more sensible than the adults or someone older than them. Like they have a greater sense and they have a more realistic perception, which I think is so um, interesting. And yeah, I really enjoyed the Romare film as well. Like it's like I said, I'm learning to like really appreciate, because um, for one thing, I'm someone who, to be honest, I really don't really care about people who hang out at a beach, because I'm not a person who really cares to hang out at a beach. And when someone can make me not only care about people hanging out at a beach, but empathize with them, uh, and see it in a different way, I'm like, that's a great filmmaker, because you made me care about something I would have not even, it wouldn't have come on my radar. So, and then on top of that, Romer is like deceivingly, you would think, oh yeah, he's making these kind of soapy love stories. And then there's this scene in this film where um, Pauline and her cousin, they're picking fruit. I think it's an apple, and then they're talking about uh, a serpent, and then I think that guy, I forget what his name is, the guy who's more like selfish and stuff like that, just wants to live for
Henri.
the moment. Henri,
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
shows up, and I'm like, wow, it's like this soapy romance, but you just did this biblical reference, and that's a, to me, that's, I really admire that, how you can make it, you can make all these things connect. So yeah.
Yeah, that already made me think of the ending when Marion and Pauline are in the car, and then Marion says to Pauline that, yeah, you can think that Sylvain did nothing wrong, and I will think that Angie did nothing wrong, and then we can both be happy. But of course, Pauline knows the truth, but Marion doesn't, and yeah, so
That's
then
right.
kind of Angie kind of gets away with it all in a way, like he never gets caught to Marion, and yeah, Marion stays naive until the end.
Yeah, and it's like Eve, again, it's like this biblical reference of Genesis, this kind of ignorance or naivete. But also, what Marion reminded me of, I was like, oh, this is like, if I had to do a video review of this film, I might call it Barbie without Ken, or Barbie in search of Ken, because it's like this. Marion is this Barbie-esque, something that it's even mentioned in the dialogue, the perfection that basically all women want to achieve, and how they would want to look or have that kind of figure, but it's really not interesting to Henri. And that whole thing about it's not about this statuesque, uh, doesn't necessarily make you more attractive. I think that there's some really profound, interesting uh, things going on in that film.
Yeah, and of course, there's this great scene in the Anri's house where all of the characters talk about their views of love, and Marion
Yes.
talks about how she thinks that again just being content and staying still and being like faithful, that isn't love, but actual love is kind of like true desire, and so, something like she says something like that. But then Henri in another scene says that he kind of hates Marion because she's always there and she doesn't leave him space to like miss her or desire her, because she's always there and she's always willing. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's so interesting. Well, yeah, like how that develops, because in the beginning we see that she's actually kind of still interested in him, right? When she sees him at the beach, she's like, oh, he was basically, I was with him before I got married. Uh, and then, there's this kind of flirtation, but he basically just throws himself at her, and then she is just uninterested. And that theme we see a lot in a lot of Romer films too, that the friend all of a sudden coming on too strong, and then just essentially repelling what he's desiring. So all these follies of love, it's very Shakespearean, I think, because it's all about the fickleness and the follies of love. And then love doesn't, just because you love someone doesn't mean that love drives you to the best person, or because we have all these ideas about where we idealize love, that love essentially takes you to the right person for you, and ensures that you're perfectly matched, where it's like that's not necessarily true. We're not really sure where love ends and desire begins. And yeah, all these curiosities about that area. And yeah.
Yeah, like one kind of unrelating point is also I've been reading lots of reviews for this in preparation, and I know many people actually say that the like two criticisms I saw for this film is one is that how simplistic the cinematography is, which is something that I completely disagree with, because I love this type of very natural, beautiful looking, simple cinematography where you just put the camera somewhere and we see the beach and the trees and everything. I think it's really beautiful. And then some people said that the conversations that these people have aren't interesting, which to me is just absolutely ridiculous comment. I mean, I think the dialogue is always the highlight in Romer films, and how these people are always, even when you don't root for them, they are in their own way like very smart and intelligent, and they talk in a very often like very profound and like proficient way, and they are always pleasure to listen to, whether you agree with them or not.
Yeah, I'm of your view. I always find aesthetically very pleasing Romero's films. So um, I love that. Like I love, like you said, I love the stillness of the camera. I love the simplicity of it as well. Even though they're like it's simplistic, I don't think just because something creates very basic elements in the frame makes it less pleasing. That can be actually very interesting, because it's like this kind of minimalism, but it creates this profundity. That's what I always feel, that what's interesting is it's like on the surface it's like this Sophie romance, but at the end when you go through the experience it's very profound. And of course their dialogue I don't think is realistic, in a because it's a philosophical it's like a dialogue, so it's like it's not realistic, but it reminds me of, well, as Tony always talks about, Aristotelian, or Platonic, or he'll know better than me, that kind of dialogue. But more, it reminds me a lot of like Ovid and like Shakespeare, like that, like this, where they're kind of sitting there and they're like they are like those gods, like gesticulating about this thing, like what is desire, and what is love, and you know and at the same time they're mixed in with the mundane, because right, there's a romance and then there's the mundane, because what human beings really like as well, that's explored in Full Moon in Paris, is stability, predictability. It's like we can't all just float away, because the challenges of real life and real human nature is much more complex, and that's what's introduced by the Henri character, which is seen as devilish, where oh, that's what we kind of realized about ourselves after we fell from the garden. I think it's very clever. It's like very interesting. It's profound. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and I think again that I don't understand how you can find the dialogue boring or uninteresting, because it's about themes that we can all relate to, about love and relationships, whether like what is love, when you should commit to a relationship, what is desire, what is the relationship between desire and love. And of course, there's the interesting relationship of Pierre and Marion, as well as Pierre is completely in love with Marion, and they've known each other beforehand. And Pierre has always been interested in Marion, but Marion, I mean, just likes Pierre as a friend, but doesn't want to commit to him, even though she knows that Pierre is, like, for the most part, a fairly decent person, and she knows that she could trust him because he doesn't actually. He isn't as despicable as Henri, for example, as he doesn't cheat or do things like this. But the one thing that I found like really despicable in both Pierre and Marion is that how Marion says that to Pierre that I want you to kind of be with Pauline, and Pauline is fucking 15. Like, that's so disgusting that you have your
it's so
15-year-old
bad.
cousin, and yeah, you adult man, just take her. You'll take care of her. Like, that's so disgusting.
Oh yeah, and even Henri at the end, right, where he's like, "Well, I'm a man and you're a woman and you have nice legs."
Yeah, that's like really
You're right.
disgusting and creepy scene. Yeah,
And I think that's where Romer is like always showing there's a darkness to it. Like, he makes these beautiful films, but they're not without complexity and darkness. It's like you're saying in The Aviator's Wife as well. You constantly have this, or often, actually, you have this theme a lot about older and men, and then younger women, and then how they're trying to even manipulate and control, like in La Collectionist as well. So it's like there's a darkness, there's a real darkness there that makes you very uncomfortable. Um, and a part of me was asking, am I actually okay? I'm not. I'm like, I'm obviously not okay with this. Uh, but why would you put that in? And then it also made me think of like Call Me by Your Name and stuff like that. And I said, no, well, age inappropriate interaction does happen in the real world. So I think Romer is not shows that, don't dismiss me as someone who's making very like airy fairy, like, you know, soapy romances. There's a there are all these uncomfortable truths tied to desire as well.
yeah. He made this film called Claire's Knee, which is almost like Lolita, kind of more
Yeah.
sophisticated version of Lolita. It's part of the Six Moral Tales. I actually rewatched it after our first podcast as well, because I've been in a Rome mood. But that's a creepy, even though otherwise really beautiful film.
Yeah.
But yeah, of course, there is this. Of course, many young people are very attracted to older people. I can relate to that as well, as I was like that when I was a teenager. But you kind of don't understand it from the adult's perspective, as you should, again, know better, you should be better, but you do understand it from the teenage perspective, as many of us have been there. Yeah.
But what's also amazing is here is a teenager, like, she does not buy into, she sees right through the adult men, which is also interesting because clearly she has that maturity where she's like, yeah, I'm buying this, I'm not buying this. And so, you know, that's positive. But the way they pursue, and their fickleness, right, like Pierre, you know, Marion, it kind of shows that, okay, you're in love with Marion, but as soon as Marion suggests, oh, you can go after my cousin who's underage, how easily he's basically accepts that, and in a way starts already angling towards that. And it's like, well, how desperate is Pierre that it's like, if he can't have Marion, his other option is her cousin who's like 15, and he thinks that that's viable, and none of them realize that this is a temporary state of being, right? Because that's where I think it's also very clever what he shows is that people get that way. They're in that holiday mood, and then they think it's a state of reality, but it's not. It's like, because you have, it's what we discussed earlier, it's because you have a break from daily concerns of life, you're not busy, and you're in a time of rest, that's when you have time to actually consider all these things. And then they think like this is an ongoing state of things when everyone's there temporarily and in passing, except for maybe Pierre.
And then there's this again point how like Marion doesn't like the teenage boy Sylvain. That she
Yes.
again tries to say that yeah you shouldn't be with him, and Pierre and Sylvain also have that conflict near the end of the film when they find out that Pierre had again told about Henri to Marion and stuff. It's such so soapy like plot in many ways, but I just so it kind of feels like trash in a way, but just in an art house way, and that's what I like.
Yeah, I don't know. It's never like you're right. Like, of course, you do think, oh, this is frivolous, but then at the same time, it's not. And Sylvain is such an interesting character because it's like right away you have this bias to totally dismiss the teenage boy because we just see teenage boys as this hormonal. Like you would expect him to act more like how those older men were acting, whereas in he almost had a dignity. Like he was one, he was transparent, and two, he actually had a dignity. Like he had a commitment. He was like he liked Pauline, so he was like pursuing her in a very honest and like direct way. Um, but one thing about Romer I do have to mention is he always has those scenes with like bad dancing, which always cracks me up. It's
Yeah,
like people in his films can't dance, but as Tony mentioned, they can't dance, but yet it's so hypnotic to watch them in his
yeah,
review of Full Moon in Paris. And I do agree with that. There's an element where you can't stop watching them, but at the same time you're like this dancing is not very good.
and it's kind of an interesting contrast in a way how they kind of speak very perfectly. They are natural, but they make these perfect, very uh, intelligent sentences, and then they also all look very pretty and stuff, but then they can't dance. So there's a big contrast there that they sometimes feel like perfect human beings, but they are so flawed. You made both in terms of morals, but also just because they can't dance. Yeah,
And he's new wave too, right? Romer.
yeah, he started around that time as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so that just as we were discussing this, it kind of hit me. I was like, oh, that's a kind of deconstruction as well, because generally we see beautiful people in the musicals and stuff like that, and they dance really well and perfectly. But here it's like there is there are beautiful people, but they're not like great at dancing, like you said. So it's like this kind of flawed. It's kind of a deconstructing. It's also bringing like kind of this idealized godlike status back to earth. Like even with someone like Marion, because you like see her and she's like, clearly very attractive and everything like that, and almost perfect. And then it's like, well, she can't dance, and then she's so clingy, and she's right, like then they're showing this, and then she's so like you said, like naive, or she's just ignorance is bliss at best. She believes in ignorance is bliss, and then she's after this guy that's actually not aesthetically that attractive or anything like that. He's balding. He's right. He's not. It's very interesting. Like very interesting things going on in that film.
Yeah, Marion reminds me a bit of Laura Palmer. Again, both in there's
Yes.
the looks and even the characters a bit. Of course, Laura has way worse flaws, I think, than Marion in many ways. So again, the drug abuse and everything. But
Yeah.
and of course, there's no Bob in this film, fortunately. But
No Bob.
yeah,
Are you
yeah.
sure?
No,
Henri
well,
is kind of like. Go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, Henri could be from the Black Lodge.
Yeah, he's very like he's a very interesting. You expect to like really not like him, and then it's weird at the end. There's a switch. Like he actually shows some flashes where you're like, all right, well, at least he's honest. And then where he's like, okay, we all need to reconcile. And he's not getting involved in these fights like these men are, right? So he almost walks away redeeming himself a little bit, even though what he did with Pauline's totally not cool. But uh, he redeems himself a bit, and then Pierre totally falls in estimation because Pierre starts showing these qualities that you're like, oh, I kind of see some of the things that Marion doesn't like about him, right? Like this whole I'm gonna tell on you, and the jealousy, and then willingness to go fight with a teenage boy. You're like, okay, Pierre, you hold yourself out as this very honorable man, but really, like, you're also like very childish. Like, you're not necessarily the best for Marion either. Um, and then Marion herself is not that great either herself, even though they're like he's like idealizing her. So they're both the same in a way, right? Marion's idealizing Henri, and Pierre is idealizing Marion, and then it's just this weird thing that people do.
Yeah, but I think again, Henri is he manipulates both the characters of the film, but also the audience in a way because he has these kind of flashes of again class and sophistication, and he's very intelligent, clearly. And then obviously the reconciliation that you were talking about kind of feels like he's redeemed, but he maybe is manipulating us by that, and we
That's
kind of
a
make
very good point.
and it makes us forget all the awful things that he's doing, like when he's like Pauline is sleeping and he's there and so creepy. It's almost like Bob and Laura in Firewalk with Me.
Yeah, and he has a daughter. He has a young daughter, which is also interesting. I was like, okay, he has this young daughter, and then he's clearly very loving and attentive towards his daughter. But again, he may be manipulating us, and that's a very good point because that takes us back to that scene where the garden, and then he shows up. So is he that serpent? He's that manipulator. He's that devilish. He's from the Black Lodge, like you're saying. So that's a very interesting point, actually. Maybe he manipulated me, yeah, into believing he's better than he is.
But Marion is kind of a manipulator as well, but she doesn't manipulate Henri, but she manipulates Pierre, of course, like we talked about how she tries to make him go for Pauline and kind of
Yeah.
makes him in a way do these more immoral things and these more impulsive things. Yeah,
Yeah, and he
both her.
continues to hang around her too. Like that's why I found strange. It's like once you know, why don't you distance yourself? But he can't help it. He just keeps hanging around trying to convince her, and whatever she tells him, he listens to. So yeah, Pierre's kind of a loser.
And of course, I think Sylvain is the
Sorry,
character.
Pierre.
Yeah, I think
No, go ahead.
Sylvain is the character who kind of gets redeemed in a way the most. Of course, he starts when he first comes to the picture in the beach. He's all about Marion as well. Like she asks Pauline, like, "Is that your sister or something?" And yeah, she's so beautiful, and he wants her to. But then he grows in the film, and then actually falls for Pauline, which is way more appropriate. And Pauline is a way more decent person, and then Sylvain obviously tries to be honest as well, and he's the one who also confronts Henri in the yard and says to you are lying and blah blah blah. And yeah, it's like he's
Sylvain.
actually in a way like he's like how do you say he's not in a position of power, but he still stands up to himself. So he's kind of like a knight in a shining armor in a way.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Actually, that's really. I didn't expect it because in the beginning the way he kind of comes and he's all about Marion, and then he's like, I have other girlfriends and all. So you say, but then over the course of how he acts in a way that you like respect him a lot more than Henri or Pierre. But overall, yeah, you said this like most everyone, well, Marion, Pierre, and Henri, like you're like they're not very likable people, but yeah, Pauline and Sylvain, they are. um, and you're like you actually feel for them being stuck around all these adults, um, and which is flipping this whole thing because we always think like adults intruding in like teenagers' lives actually improves the teenagers' lives. Like we give them guidance and we prevent them from all these follies, but actually, I mean, we're committing them on a daily basis. So it's an interesting flip of what it means to be mature.
I think Pierre is very interesting because at the same time he is kind of the most conscious person of them, but at the same time the kind of most ignorant, because he's of course conscious from the very beginning that Henri is a serpent and not something to be trusted. And then he also, when they go to the bar to dance, like he's like, let's not go there, it's not fun. Again, they can't dance. He kind of knows that beforehand. But then he's just so in love with Marion that he kind of lets himself to be manipulated by her. So in that way, he's very ignorant, but then he's also very conscious of kind of the male immorality, you could say, and the male flaws of Henri and the others. Yeah.
And yet he still gets manipulated by Henri.
Yeah.
Right? Because all these things, Henri is totally playing him too, which is also interesting. Because in a way he's aware of him, but he's all part of the game. Because it's like the more Pierre does certain things, the more Henri seems more appealing. So he's being manipulated by him as well, which is so interesting. But like one thing you said about earlier on about some people saying it's boring, the dialogues being boring. So that the extra in this release where Romer is showing that interviewer one scene that's just been improvised between the actors, and then the scene as it is in the film. It's really interesting where he said, look, if you do it like realistically, like in the improvisation, letting the actors speak in certain whatever, even letting their voices get raised and stuff, somehow you don't get to the an authenticity, which I thought was really powerful, because you don't think about it that way, because we were talking about Godard and we were talking about Wes Anderson and this clearly very constructed, curated reality. Same with Romer. I don't think he's hiding that he's making a very curated reality. People are much more talkative. They're expressing things externally that they would maybe think about internally, or may not even be aware of internally. Yet there's a kind of authenticity that comes out through that method of curation, which is not always how we see film. We always think, oh, the more realistic it seems, the more authenticity you would experience from it.
Yeah, again, that realism can be kind of like fake authenticity as well. And sometimes you need to do something different and something unrealistic to find the truth in the situation. I mean, I think there are some like really famous quotes about that too. I remember Tony once quoted some philosopher or something about that, but was it Aristotle's, from Aristotle's Poetics maybe? I haven't read it, but it might have been.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
But I'm
He was
sure that
talking about it.
Tony will mention that in the comments, hopefully. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that, because even in his review on Letterboxd, Full Moon in Paris, like all these things that he brings up, obviously I'm not familiar. I don't know them as in depth, so it really adds layers, and then you realize, okay, there's so much more craft than what seems like this. What some people might see Romer is very surfacey, like rom-comish films, which I think some people like Romer for that reason, because it seems to them that it's like related to the kind of fun rom-coms, matters of the heart stuff uh, that you see in like mainstream. But I think that's not true. It may seem like they're related, but I think Romer is doing a totally different thing. It just looks like he's doing that, but he's doing something totally different. And his stuff is way more complex than you think. It's like it's revealing certain things about even some of the ugliness in our nature, to want to control people, to make them want to desire us, and this sense of control. It's there. It's in that romance. He's showing all these elements: the jealousy, the control, the naivete, the ignorance, the even the conflicts in what we are saying about what we want versus how we're acting.
Yeah, Tony also wrote a couple of great reviews on this Romer film called Tale of Winter, which is
Okay.
our kind of mutual favorite. And there he, for example, talked about how, again, that film is kind of like a platonic dialogue on film. I think he said in this first review of that film, and it kind of feels this is also like that. Like I already mentioned the scene in the house when they talk about love, kind of how they investigate what love is and what each other's positions are. That's kind of like a platonic dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of, that kind of comment that he made on Tale of Winter also fits this film and many other Romer films. And that's one of my favorite things about Romer films are these discussions that are very profound, but they are kind of down to earth in a way that they aren't like snobby. That you kind of can really relate to these ideas and these people, even though they are almost like philosophers, but they don't philosophize in a very kind of pretentious way, but more in a, again, down to earth and in a way that has lots of heart.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. He's a great filmmaker. Even when I saw that Bakery Girl of Monceau, like it's like 30-minute short film, but it's like what he weaves in, but yet it's something that's very accessible. But then I like those kinds of artists that they're like gateway people. It's like they're bringing you in, and then they're teleporting you into more deeper reflection. So it's like entertaining, it's aesthetically beautiful, it's all that, and then on top of that, there's this weaving in of complexity and ideas and methods, and that's it's, that's like a kind of a real magician artist is the way I see them.
Yeah, but Rome is like has like a very consistent style, but it never feels boring. I've seen like 22 films from him, I think now, and again, they are very similar to each other, but they just every time they blow me away. And while they often tackle some of the similar themes, each film always has a bit of a different angle to each topic. And I think that Six Moral Tales, for example, are a bit different than the Comedies and Proverbs, and then the Four Seasons that came after Comedies and Proverbs they are quite similar to, I think, Comedies and Proverbs. They do like tackle friendships and love and all these types of things. And I would love to talk about some of those films in this podcast in the future. Hopefully we can do that. Yeah.
Yes, that would be great.
And we can even do like we can do even another film from the Comedies and Proverbs at some point. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to do that. Yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to going forward and getting through all of them, because now it's like I've seen 3 films from there. There's a total of 6 films in there, I think.
Yeah.
So that's why like I'm enjoying actually going through them, and then also seeing. I like that when you said like there are variations on a theme. So in that way too, you can see even in the Comedies and Proverbs some connections and some areas of interest, but absolutely each one is different. It's not like it's the same thing. It's different. It's like, well, there are certain themes and ideas that overall, but it's very different lenses, very interesting characters. He creates really interesting characters that you really are become very curious about, and they behave in curious ways that you become fascinated with, like, why are they doing it that way? Why can't they see that? Why can't they? And it's like it ends up being a very rewarding experience seeing his films.
Yeah, I think that box set has a film called The Green Ray, which might be his most famous film, and that we could do at some point. And then one that I'm looking forward to rewatching is it Boyfriends and Girlfriends or something like that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that could be one to do.
Definitely. And then we forgot to mention in the La Chinoise, they mentioned your favorite film being banned by the authorities in France.
Yeah, The Nuns.
The La Religieuse or whatever it's.
Yeah. Yeah, we are gonna do that in the podcast very soon, but yeah.
which I still need to watch.
Well, I'll spoil it. It might be in the 4th episode, but not in the next episode, but maybe after that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I was
I like.
considering for the 3rd episode already, but yeah, I think it's gonna be in the 4th one. Yeah.
Yeah, I like this. This is like a lot of fun, and my wife's getting excited too. Each time she'll be like, "Okay, I want to see what SGS recommends now," because she watches the films with me. So the ones you recommend. So it's always fun.
It was so hard for me to pick the new recommendations right away. It just has took me forever.
Exactly. I'm the one who's enjoying, because that's the hard part, picking and recommending films. So in a way, yeah, I you know, I don't envy your position, because then you have to kind of think, okay, which ones and then which two, and like that. I just get to watch them. I just get to like pick them off the shelf or whatever and watch them, or order them and then watch them. So.
Yeah, and I'm again. It's hard because I kind of want to recommend them all at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
And then there's also that fact that I'm always a bit self-conscious with certain films that I'm like, am I intelligent enough to talk about that? For example, like the Yoshida films, I know you own them, but like I really don't know how I would have like an hour-long conversation about those. They are such so insane art that it's so hard to say anything about them, even though I love watching them.
I mean, when I watched La Chinoise, even till last night, I was thinking, I don't know what I'm gonna say about this film. So I'm just gonna listen to SJS, and it's like I'm always surprised by the things you say. It's like you say things and then things click in my head, and then I say, oh, okay, yeah, like this scene, that scene, and then I actually feel like, okay, oh, there's something to say. So in a way, like I find this um, format keeps surprising me even from the first one, because I constantly feel like, what am I going to say? If I had to make a video about this film, for example, I would find that really difficult. I'd be like, what exactly would I say about it? But in this kind of format, it really starts bringing things up, and you say, oh yeah, and you are more than intelligent enough to discuss any of the films, obviously, um, because you're so attentive and articulate, and then you've seen and you've seen the film multiple times, and you think about it, and you wrestle with the ideas and themes. So it's always a rewarding experience from my side. So I don't think you should worry about how you're going to discuss any film. You're going to do a commendable job every time.
Well, in the emails we mentioned Marketa Lazarova, and that's gonna be a hard one, but very interesting one.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing that as well. But yes, very curious to see what you come up with next. So either we mention it, we're going to talk about that now, or are we going to talk about that recording you?
Well, let's talk about the next choices now, and then the music after. But I'm glad that you liked both of these films again. So so far it has been a success with the podcast. So, and I know you don't mind even if you didn't like the films, because you like talking about films that you don't like to. So, but it's good that you have liked them so far. So. And one more thing, I remember like when we did the film curations and canons, like you said there that one of your goals is to finish my favorites list. So this is like a good way to do it slowly, that I recommend these films to you.
But it'll take a very long time, I think.
Yeah.
Few years. We'll have to do it for like years.
Yeah.
But yeah, that will be great. Yes, that is one of my goals. Absolutely.
And with some of the films, the accessibility is bad too, because again, not all of them are on physical media. But
yeah, and I also like learning about the perspective at which you're coming from when you're seeing it, because I'm always curious about that, because obviously we're all experiencing it, but we're all our individual people. So it's like I love like hearing about something someone else loves. That's always been an interest to me, even in music and stuff. I love saying to someone, okay, yeah, play me something you love. And then I try to, and then even if I don't get it or whatever, then I love to ask that person, tell me about it. Like, and then when you hear it, it's like, oh, okay, and you really learn something. It's I feel like it's such a great way to broaden perspectives, because it's not really about liking or not liking. It's like really about trying to get from another person's perspective what something looks like, and then yeah, I think that's so rewarding. So I'm really enjoying this.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, it's really fun for me. Like I mentioned in the introduction to this podcast, that I really enjoy like seeing what people think when I recommend them stuff and how they react to it. I know obviously Tony also watches lots of my recommendations and listens to lots of my recommendations, and he tends to like them too. And it's always fun to hear what he thinks about them.
Yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, now it's time to reveal the next two films, or the next podcast, episode 3. And these films are very different from each other. I already showed this to Altaz before recording, but one of them is a early 2000s Russian film by Andrei Zvyagintsev. It's The Return. And Altaz also has this Blu-ray, so he already has it, so he can watch it when he has time. Yeah. So I think this will be a very interesting film to discuss. It's kind of like a slow-paced kind of thriller character study film, and it's kind of ambiguous at times, so it's very interesting to talk about.
Yeah, I haven't seen any of his films, so I'm looking forward to that one.
And I've been really itching to rewatch that, so now I have the opportunity to do so. And then this next one is like a really big Japanese classic, a very sad film, and I'm sure that there will be a million things to say about this film, but it's Mizoguchi's The Life of Oharu, one of his 3 big films, which are again Shanshu the Bailiff, Yugetsu Monogatari, and then The Life of Oharu.
Yeah, this is going to be great to watch, because we're soon going to see Ugetsu as part of that Japanese season at the Garden Cinema, so it's going to be some good. And I saw and I'll be seeing Sancho the Bailiff as well, because they're showing that. I've already seen that once already, but yeah, very excited. I think that'll be great to watch.
Yeah. But yeah, those are the 2 films, so if anybody wants to watch them before the next podcast, they can also do it. I'm not expecting anybody to do that, but if you want, you can. Yeah.
That's what I did when you guys did Funeral Parade of Roses on Chris Mohan's channel. I like watched it before, and it's a lot of fun. So, yeah, if anyone is considering doing it, I would highly recommend it, because it's a lot more fun. If you've seen the film before, then it's like, then you don't have to worry about spoilers or anything like that, and then you can also join in with comments and stuff of your own about what you thought and what you think about maybe some of the things we're saying. So it could be a lot of fun if anyone's considering it.
And I know The Life of Oharu is one of Tony's favorites as well, but I think he hasn't seen The Return, although I might be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure he hasn't seen that one.
Yeah, Tony's comments are always, I mean, what he's put from our previous discussion too, with Fox and his friends and all that, he put so many like interesting points that I was thinking about after.
Yeah, so shout out to Tony. Tony, thanks for all that inspiration. I'm sending you
Come
love.
join us, Tony. Come join us.
Yeah. Tony, I'm sending you love, my towering God. That's a bit of a poem. I feel a poem coming. That's what the French character in the OC says. Yeah.
And we both need to pick up some anthology of Brecht plays.
Yeah.
Or maybe Tony can write us a little something about Brecht, because neither of us are that aware of Brecht. So maybe he can talk about some of the elements of Brecht that he sees in Godard or something. That would be really good information.
Yeah. But no pressure. I'm not sure how many Brecht plays he has read, but I remember in one of our talks we talked about the term Brechtian a little bit, or he talked about it more, obviously because I don't know that much about it. But yeah. And again, bring on the Hegelian dialectics as well, as again Hegel obviously inspired Marx, and we just talked about Marxist Leninism in film. So yeah. Yeah, anyway.
Not Hegel either.
Yeah. But yeah, let's talk about classical music now. So I'll again say straight off the bat that neither of us really know how to talk about classical music, so this might be a complete farce.
Yeah,
And but I again recommend it.
we'll sound like the characters in La Chinoise. We'll be like saying things that won't make any sense.
Yeah,
Me more than you, but yeah, please go ahead,
yeah,
intro
I'll
us.
give a short introduction to this. So I recommend it to you. Um, two string quartets that are in the same recording. The first one is by Claude Debussy. I think that piece was composed in the last decade of the 19th century. And then there's a string quartet by Maurice Ravel, which is from the first decade of 20th century. But they are both kind of part of the Impressionist movement, although apparently both of the composers kind of rejected that term. I don't really know the details why they rejected it, but apparently they did. And there's, I think, like academic discussion whether they should be called impressionism or not. But again, I'm not well versed at all in things like this, so but I just putting that out there. And they were again contemporaries of each other. Claude Debussy was, I think, maybe a dozen years older than Ravel, and Debussy also died, I think, a couple decades before Ravel. But they also worked at the same time for a while. And I think these pieces fit really well together. Of course, we often have these classical recordings when you have like two or three pieces from different composers, but sometimes they don't fit well together. But I think these two fit really well together, and I love both of these pieces a lot. I think both of them are masterpieces, but I think I especially like the Ravel one, maybe a little more than the Debussy one, but I think both of them are great. But then at the same time, I think I've only listened to these like 3 times or something myself, as this is like a new discovery for me, and I feel like I need to listen to them more times to kind of give any more kind of very particular comments about them, where I can kind of separate like individual parts and things like that better. But now I can just say that I find them very beautiful and rewarding to listen to.
Yeah, like an amazing recording, and I think this is the part of classical music that's even complex that I'm trying to get a grasp on. So I'm glad you picked a recording instead of just like certain works, because then it's like there's this whole complexity that comes from like which recording to listen to of that work, because they are different interpretations of that work. So um, which I'm trying to learn, and then I haven't even heard different recordings of the same thing to know, how it's been interpreted different in terms of timing and everything like that. But this recording I really really enjoyed, so I've been listening to it regularly since you mentioned that we discuss it, and it's gotten to a point where I can hear uh, certain movements and stuff like in my head, and I really like it. Like I really like how it's like kind of embedded itself into my life, and I can hear the music, and just like you, if I had to choose, I would say yes. You said the Ravel recordings are the later, the string quartet is
Yeah,
the later one in the recording, right? So yeah, I would say yes. That part. If you had to say which one, I would say it's that quartet that I would say is slightly uh, appealed to me even more. But it's like they're both absolutely beautiful, and I like in the Debussy one. I like I love strings, the sound of strings, and then I love the um, um, kind of the furious when that they're some at points they're playing quite furiously. They're like and so I like that mix. Like creates a lot of activity, gives you a very kind of uh, energy burst. I also like when they pluck the strings too. That's a very great uh, sound. But what I found really interesting is when I was listening to these pieces, I feel like they've been quoted a lot in film soundtracks and in modern music. So certain things I was listening to, and I was like, wow, it's that sounds a little bit like Eurythmics. Like they've definitely quoted from this. So I feel like they might be quite popular. These two quartets, they've been quoted a lot in modern music.
Yeah, I'm sure they have, and of course both of the composers are some of the like most famous French composers ever. And I really like in the Debussy one how it starts with this kind of almost like an alienating sounding
Mm.
strings. Like the first part sounds quite alienating, but in a
Mm.
good way. But I like the Ravel piece because to me it kind of holds your attention better throughout the whole piece, and it's kind of a bit more whimsical, and I think it has a bit more kind of emotional power to it than the Debussy one. But again, like I said, I think both of them are absolutely masterful, and I have kind of noticed the more I've listened to classical music that string quartets tend to be my favorite pieces more than
Mhm.
like the big symphonies and stuff, because I love string instruments and they just hit the feels like more
Mhm.
than other instruments to me at least. So I really love string quartets, and I've recently listened to, for example, Schubert string quartets as well, and those are really beautiful. I mean, they made me even cry. So they are that level of beautiful. But these are also, like I mentioned in my introduction in that video, that these have been some of my recent favorites and some of the best that I've heard so far. But I know that we will definitely do more string quartets also in the series in the future, as they are to me like the top tier classical music. Although I hope that we will do some symphonies as well at some point, and maybe piano pieces.
Yeah, I agree with you. I also personally really enjoy strings, and um, what I find interesting about strings is, and I feel like maybe this is why it also connects, why we probably both connect with it, because it's like strings express very well tension, but also anxiety. So it's totally like what you're saying about the Debussy. It's like, yes, there's that alienating feeling. Like there's more anxiety and tension in that string quartet, and then in the Ravel string quartet, it's much more, I guess, calming. So it's really interesting how strings can really take you through that whole range of emotion, where with certain methods of playing and speeds of playing and curiosity also in how strongly you're playing, you can create these experiences that, like, can feel, you can really almost, you can feel what that's like without words. And so listening to those also made me think about how, you know people who are actually listening to this piece at the time it came out, how they must have experienced it, because I could see the quoting in modern music and in even cinematic scores. I feel like there were images that were tied to it, so I almost was curious about what it must have been like to listen to it without those certain images uh, attached to those things. It could be like a more pure experiential experience where you don't have to um, attach any words or even direct images, but it can be a much more almost like meditative experience where you're just experiencing it, what's going on.
Yeah, and I think there's a great dynamic in both of these pieces, that sometimes it sounds very big and alienating, even whimsical in a way, but then obviously it calms down at moments, and then it just has this kind of serene beauty and it calms you down. But I know actually Ravel was someone when he was in the Conservatory of Paris, that the people kind of hated him there, or the guy who was the leader of the conservatory didn't like Ravel. But obviously he was wrong, like history has shown us that, because Ravel is one of the greats. So, but it's interesting how often some of these composers, maybe they aren't liked when they are composing this music, but then, like in retrospect, they become legends. I mean, I think we talked about that a bit in the Snowberry discussion
Hmm.
too. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And listening to also classical is also making me much more aware of how majority of the music we listen to is song, so there are lyrics, and then how overpowering lyrics can be. So like just like how we're talking about in films, like films that are, shot differently, staged differently, can also allow for more space for the audience. So in that same way, I'm really appreciating how classical music actually creates space for yourself in that experience. Where in songs, it depends like how the lyrics are, but there can be they can be pulling you in one way or another. There's an interpretation that's coming with the words, or at least a direction that the words might take you, even though there are still ways to interpret the lyrics individually and subjectively. But I feel like I appreciate the space you get in classical music. It's more like an amorphous space, and you're there, and then there's you're purely experiencing. And then, like you said, like it can make you tear up, it can make you remember certain things. So it's so like self-reflective in a way. So I'm really appreciating that about listening to classical music.
Yeah, I just got a like brief kind of inner snob moment because we talked about Godard today and Rome and now these great string quartets and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I cried to this string quartet. Yeah, it's beautiful.
That's it. We're on the road. We're on the road. We're basically going to be as alienated as we feel by listening to that first string quartet.
And there are lots of crazy string quartets from the 20th century when they start doing the atonality and the dissonance and things like that. That they sound really alienating, like Bela Bartok, which I've talked about much and a little bit that his stuff is like really alienating as well, way more than this.
Yeah, and it's like with classical, like I've just listened to all these like Bartok and Schubert, and it's like I've listened, but I haven't really pieced it out like you're saying, like to really think about time, because I think in general there's not very good information about classical. We see it as in the same way as when we were talking about world cinema, everyone just sees it as that's classical music. But then to think about how it spanned across centuries, and there are movements, and there were styles, and then there were quotes, and then there were even maybe critiques of different pieces. So I'm like, there's so much to explore there, and kind of also learn about a little bit in terms of, yes, like something like Bartok, which is much more closer to where we are in time period, versus something that's like Bach, which is way back. It's even precedes Mozart. So it's like I never thought about those things as well. So it's going to be interesting to see also what you recommend in the different recordings and different composers, and I think it'll be fun to tack on, even though I can't talk about it intelligently, but
Yeah, but again, I will always pick like a specific recording for each episode, so we can listen to the same thing.
yes, that's much better, because otherwise it's really differs between recording to recording, even though it's the same piece.
But again, I'll just say to the viewers that next time it will be Schubert, but I won't reveal the recording yet. But I will obviously tell it to Altaz very soon. So,
yeah. Okay, great.
And by the way, I was actually thinking that after each episode, I will always do maybe like a 5-minute video where I will also announce the picks for the next podcast. In addition to telling them in the podcast itself, I think that would be good. And in that video, I can always tell the recordings as well. So
yeah, because we're talking about it so late too, so I don't know how many people make it to this point.
Yeah, I mean
so
there will always be timestamps, but again, people don't always look at that. And so yeah, I think it will be good to shoot a separate short video. So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it'll be great.
But anyway, I was just gonna say anyway, it was good that you like this music too, and I think we will get better at discussing classical music as time goes on. Obviously, it's such a skill that you need to develop, and I think probably these string quartets I can probably talk about them better as time goes by, as I listen to them more. It's just really hard now, as I've only listened to it like 3 times or something, so it's not enough to talk about this type of dance music after you've listened to it 3 times. So
yeah, completely agree with you. So another, I'm looking forward to this next 2 week journey with these two films, and then the recording you'll suggest. So it's going to be another fun 2 weeks, and then we will again get the opportunity to do this again, hopefully.
Yeah, and again, this went well. I was a bit nervous about La Chinoise as it is so complex, but I think it went quite well, and it wasn't as difficult as one might expect beforehand. So
Yeah, I agree.
yeah. But anyway, thanks to everybody who watched this podcast, and let us know what you think of these films or this music. I'm at least expecting Tony to give us some comments. I'm not sure about anybody else, but at least Tony will usually give us comments, and his comments are always worth like 100 normal people. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, and I encourage people to comment. I mean, don't feel intimidated by anything. Just say what you feel. It will be interesting to get thoughts. But yes, Tony's comments are always enlightening, so they always add to the discussion.
But anyway, we will end now and look out for episode 3 whenever it comes out, hopefully sometime soon. And thanks for watching. Don't drink Coke at all. I mean, this is so awkward. Anyway, I'll leave this in. Sayonara and arigatou gozaimashita.